Imagine being ordered to kill yourself, and thanking the man who gave the command. The world of the samurai wasn't built around living a long life. It was built around something far more dangerous: honor. Tonight, we'll step into a world where shame could destroy a person long before a sword ever could. We'll discover why so many samurai accepted death without resistance, why disgrace frightened them more than any battlefield, and how an entire society came to believe that an honorable death was the greatest victory of all. If that sounds impossible, it's because the real story of the samurai is far stranger than the version most of us have heard. Behind the legends was a way of life that shaped every decision they faced, every promise they kept, and every sacrifice they were willing to make. But that's only the beginning. By the end of tonight's journey, you may find yourself looking at courage, loyalty, and honor in a completely different way. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let's travel back to a Japan where living with honor mattered more than life itself. Long before the samurai became the legendary warriors we know today, they were simply people living in a very different Japan. More than 1,000 years ago, Japan was a land of quiet villages, thick forests, misty mountains, and small farming communities. Most people spent their days growing rice, fishing along the coast, or tending to simple homes. Life followed the changing seasons, and for many families, survival depended on good weather, hard work, and a little luck. Far away from these peaceful fields, however, something was beginning to change. Power in Japan was becoming divided. Although there was an emperor, many of the country's distant regions were difficult to control. Messages traveled slowly, roads were rough, and local leaders often had to solve their own problems without waiting for help from the capital. As these local families grew wealthier and more powerful, they needed people they could trust to protect their land, their homes, and the people who depended on them. At first, these protectors were not the famous sword-carrying warriors that movies often show us. Many fought with bows instead of swords. They rode horses across open fields, guarded important roads, and defended villages from bandits or rival families. Some were skilled hunters before they became fighters. Others came from farming families and gradually learned the skills needed to survive in dangerous times. Over time, these ordinary protectors became the warriors history would remember as the samurai. Even the word samurai tells us something many people never realize. The word comes from an older Japanese word meaning to serve. That simple meaning offers an important clue about who the first samurai really were. Before they became symbols of honor and courage, the samurai were, above all else, servants. Their duty was not to chase fame or seek adventure. Their purpose was to serve the powerful families who depended on their loyalty. Their lives were not filled with constant glory. Most days were spent training, patrolling, repairing equipment, caring for horses, or waiting through long stretches of quiet. Like many soldiers throughout history, they experienced far more waiting than fighting. As the years passed, the families they served grew stronger, and so did the warriors who protected them. Little by little, the samurai became more than hired fighters. They became an entire social class with their own customs, traditions, and way of seeing the world. But the story of the samurai was only just beginning. The first samurai did not begin with the famous code of honor that most people know today. The ideas we now associate with the samurai: absolute loyalty, remarkable self-control, and placing honor above life itself developed slowly over many centuries. Those beliefs were shaped by war, peace, religion, family, and the experiences of countless generations. In the beginning, the samurai were not legends. They were simply people trying to survive in a country that was changing faster than anyone could have imagined. They could not have known that, over the centuries, their way of life would become one of the most admired and most misunderstood warrior traditions in history. If the first samurai were simply warriors who served powerful families, one question naturally follows: How did they become people who believed that dying with honor was better than living with shame? The answer did not appear overnight. It grew slowly, over hundreds of years. As Japan changed, the samurai changed with it. War became a constant part of life for many families. Battles could begin with little warning, and no one knew whether they would return home. In a world filled with so much uncertainty, the samurai searched for something that would never change. They found it in honor. Honor was more than a good reputation. It was a promise to remain loyal, a promise to be honest, a promise to place duty above personal comfort. If a samurai could keep those promises, then life still had meaning, even in the face of death. These beliefs did not come from a single source. Buddhism taught that life is temporary, and that death should not always be feared. Confucian teachings emphasized loyalty, self-discipline, and respect for family. Japan's older Shinto traditions encouraged respect for ancestors, nature, and the community. Over time, these ideas blended together, gradually shaping the values that guided the samurai. Children born into samurai families began learning these lessons from an early age. They watched the adults around them. They listened to stories of brave ancestors. They practiced discipline in small, everyday moments long before they ever carried a weapon. They were taught that true strength did not come from anger or pride. It came from remaining calm when life became difficult. A samurai who lost control of their emotions was seen as weak. A samurai who kept their word, even during hardship, earned respect. Little by little, honor stopped being just one important value. It became the foundation of the samurai way of life. The choices they made, the promises they kept, the way they treated others, even the way they prepared to face death. To many of us today, that way of thinking may seem difficult to understand. But to the samurai, honor was not something they practiced only when it was convenient. It became part of who they believed they were. And once honor became more valuable than survival itself, every decision in a samurai's life began to change. As the samurai way of life continued to evolve, the values they believed in gradually became known by a single name: Bushido. It is often translated as the way of the warrior. Today, many people think of Bushido as a strict set of rules that every samurai followed from the very beginning. But the truth is a little more complicated. Bushido did not appear all at once. It developed gradually over many generations, shaped by war, peace, changing traditions, and the experiences of countless samurai. Rather than a single written rulebook, it became a shared way of thinking. Its ideas were passed from parents to children, from teachers to students, and from experienced warriors to young apprentices. At the heart of Bushido were a handful of simple principles: loyalty, courage, honesty, self-control, respect, and above all, honor. These were not qualities that mattered only on the battlefield. They were expected to guide every part of a samurai's life. The way they spoke, the promises they kept, the way they treated both friends and strangers. Even the smallest everyday actions were believed to reveal a person's true character. For a samurai, doing the right thing when no one was watching mattered, just as much as showing bravery in battle. Of course, real life was rarely perfect. Not every samurai lived up to these ideals. Some broke their promises. Some sought power for themselves. Others acted out of fear, anger, or greed. They were human, just like anyone else. The difference was that Bushido gave them an ideal to strive toward, even when they fell short. Over time, these values became deeply connected to the identity of the samurai. They influenced how warriors judged themselves, how they judged one another, and how they hoped to be remembered after they were gone. Bushido was more than a warrior's code. It became a guide for life itself. And once those values became part of everyday life, the samurai began preparing for something few people ever truly accept: the possibility of death. For most people, the thought of death is something we try not to think about. We make plans for the future. We hope for long lives. And we naturally avoid danger whenever we can. The samurai saw the world differently. Many believed that accepting the possibility of death allowed them to live with greater courage. If they no longer feared losing their lives, they could focus completely on doing what they believed was right. That idea may seem unusual today, but to the samurai, it brought a sense of clarity. Every decision became simpler. Duty came before comfort. Honor came before fear. This way of thinking did not mean that samurai wanted to die. Like anyone else, they valued their families, their homes, and the lives they had built. But they believed there were some things that mattered even more than staying alive. To prepare for life's uncertainties, many practiced self-discipline every day. They trained their bodies through long hours of practice. They trained their minds through quiet reflection and careful self-control. Some found peace through meditation. Others found it by following daily routines with patience and discipline. These habits helped them remain calm, even when life became uncertain. The goal was not to become fearless. Fear is a natural part of being human. Instead, the goal was to keep fear from making their decisions for them. A samurai who could stay calm under pressure was believed to possess real strength, not because they felt no fear, but because they had learned to master it. Living with this mindset shaped every part of their lives. It influenced how they spoke, how they treated others, how they faced hardship, and, when the time finally came, how they faced death itself. It was this quiet acceptance that eventually gave rise to one of the most famous and most misunderstood traditions in samurai history. Of all the traditions associated with the samurai, none has become more famous or more misunderstood than seppuku. To people outside Japan, the idea can seem almost impossible to understand. Why would anyone willingly choose death? The answer begins with the way the samurai understood honor. For a samurai, losing a battle was painful. Losing a loved one was painful. But losing honor could be even worse. Honor was not something they believed could simply be earned again. If it was lost through betrayal, cowardice, or serious failure, many believed it could never be fully regained. In some situations, a samurai chose seppuku as a way of accepting responsibility and preserving their honor. At other times, it was ordered as a punishment for serious offenses, allowing the person to die with dignity rather than face a more shameful execution. It was never treated as an ordinary event. It followed a formal ceremony that reflected the importance the samurai placed on discipline and self-control. Witnesses were often present. A final farewell might be offered. Everything was expected to be carried out calmly and with dignity. One trusted companion sometimes stood nearby. Their role was to bring a swift end to the ceremony if it became necessary, reducing unnecessary suffering. To the samurai, this was considered an act of compassion as well as loyalty. Today, many people remember only the physical act itself, but that was never the point. The ceremony was meant to show responsibility, to demonstrate courage in the face of death, and to leave the world without abandoning the values they believed had defined their lives. That does not mean every samurai welcomed this fate. Many surely felt fear, sadness, or regret, just as anyone would. They were human beings, not emotionless legends. Yet within their culture, meeting death with dignity was often seen as the final proof that honor had remained unbroken. To many of us today, that belief may feel difficult to understand, that for centuries it was one of the strongest symbols of what it meant to live and die as a samurai. And nowhere was that commitment to honor tested more deeply than in the loyalty a samurai owed to the person they served. To understand the samurai, we must first understand one simple idea. Loyalty was everything. A samurai's first duty was to the lord they served. That loyalty was expected to remain unshaken through success and failure, peace and war, and even in the face of death. To us today, that may seem difficult to imagine. Most people naturally place their families first. They think about their own future, their own happiness, and the people closest to them. But for many samurai, duty often came before personal desire. Serving faithfully was not simply admired. It was expected. A samurai who abandoned their lord during difficult times risked losing far more than their position. They could lose their reputation, their honor, and the respect of everyone around them. That is why some of the most famous stories in Japanese history are not about great victories in battle. They are about extraordinary acts of loyalty. Some samurai remained beside their lord until the very end, even when defeat was certain. Others spent years carrying out the final wishes of a master who was no longer alive. To them, loyalty did not end with death. It continued for as long as honor demanded. Of course, these choices were rarely easy. Many samurai had families they loved, children who depended on them, friends they hoped to see again. Choosing duty often meant making painful sacrifices. That is one reason the samurai continue to fascinate people today. Their stories ask difficult questions that still have no simple answers. What matters most? Duty? Family? Honor? Or life itself? Each samurai answered those questions in their own way. Some remained loyal no matter the cost. Others struggled between what they believed was right and what their hearts wanted. They were not always fearless, and they were not always perfect. They were human beings trying to live up to ideals that were often impossible to achieve. No story captures that struggle more clearly than the famous tale of the 47 Ronin, whose extraordinary loyalty would become one of the greatest legends in Japanese history. When people imagine the world of the samurai, they usually picture men dressed in armor, carrying swords into battle. But that is only part of the story. Behind the famous warriors were women whose lives were shaped by many of the same values: honor, duty, loyalty, and quiet courage. Although most samurai women did not fight on battlefields, their lives were far from easy. They managed households while their husbands were away. They raised children who would one day follow the samurai way of life. They cared for elderly family members. And during times of war, they often carried responsibilities that stretched far beyond the home. Some women also learned to defend themselves. They trained with weapons that allowed them to protect their families if danger reached their homes. This was not because they expected to become soldiers. It was because they understood that difficult times could arrive without warning. Like the men in their families, samurai women were expected to show self-control and dignity. Even during moments of great hardship, they were taught to remain calm, to protect those who depended on them, and to place duty before personal comfort. But did not mean their lives were without fear. Many watched fathers, husbands, brothers, and sons leave for battles from which they might never return. Some were left to rebuild their lives after war had taken away the people they loved. Others found themselves defending their homes while waiting for news that might never come. Their courage was often quieter than the courage shown on a battlefield. But it was courage all the same. For many centuries, their stories received far less attention than the stories of famous warriors. Yet without them, the samurai way of life could not have survived from one generation to the next. They preserved traditions. They passed on values. They taught children the importance of discipline, loyalty, and honor long before those children ever carried a sword. Today, historians continue to uncover more about these remarkable women, reminding us that the story of the samurai was never only the story of the men who fought. It was also the story of the families who carried those values through times of peace and war alike. And no story would test those values more completely than the remarkable tale of the 47 Ronin. If there is one story that captures the samurai ideal more than any other, it is the story of the 47 Ronin. For more than 300 years it has been told and retold across Japan. Some see it as the greatest example of loyalty. Others see it as a tragedy. And many believe it is both. The story began in the early 18th century. a respected lord named Asano Naganori, was ordered to take part in an important ceremony at the shogun's castle. There, he came into conflict with a powerful official named Kira Yoshinaka. No one knows every detail of what happened between them, but the tension continued to grow. One day, Asano lost control of his anger and attacked Kira with a short sword. Kira survived, but drawing a weapon inside the shogun's castle was a very serious crime. Asano was ordered to commit seppuku. His lands were taken away. His family lost its position, and the samurai who had served him suddenly found themselves without a master. These masterless samurai became known as Ronin. Many expected them to quietly accept their fate and move on with their lives. Instead, they made a very different choice. For nearly 2 years they waited. Some took ordinary jobs. Others pretended to have abandoned the life of a warrior. To those watching, it seemed as though they had given up, that they had not forgotten their promise. When the time was right, the 47 Ronin carried out a carefully planned attack on Kira's home. They defeated his guards, found Kira hiding inside the estate, and brought his life to an end. Afterward, they did not try to escape. They knew exactly what would happen next. They calmly surrendered to the authorities and accepted responsibility for their actions. In the end, they too were ordered to commit seppuku. To many people, that ending may seem heartbreaking. Yet throughout Japan, the 47 Ronin came to be admired not because they survived, but because they remained loyal to their lord until the very end. Even today, people continue to debate whether they were heroes, lawbreakers, or something in between. But one thing is certain: their story became one of the most powerful symbols of loyalty, sacrifice, and honor in Japanese history. And as the centuries passed, the age of the samurai itself slowly began to draw to a close. When most of us imagine a samurai battle, we picture flashing swords, dramatic duels, and fearless warriors charging toward one another. The reality was often very different. Many battles were long, exhausting, and filled with uncertainty. Hours could pass before the fighting even began. Warriors spent much of their time waiting, watching, listening, trying to understand what their opponents might do next. Patience was often just as important as courage. Despite what movies sometimes suggest, the sword was not always a samurai's primary weapon. For many centuries, bows played an important role on the battlefield. Later, long spears became common because they could keep an enemy at a distance. Swords were certainly respected, but they were often used only after other weapons were no longer practical. A samurai's armor was carefully designed to offer protection while still allowing movement. It was strong, but it was not impossible to break. Every battle carried the risk of death. Victory depended not only on individual skill, but also on planning, discipline, and teamwork. No matter how experienced a warrior was, there was never a guarantee of survival. The battlefield was loud. Commands echoed through the air. Horses galloped across open ground. Arrows flew overhead. Yet amid all that confusion, samurai were expected to remain calm and disciplined. That was often far more difficult than it sounds. Not every battle ended with a glorious victory. Some ended in retreat. Others ended in painful defeat. Many were remembered not for heroic moments, but for the heavy cost they left behind. For the people who lived through them, war was rarely exciting. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and deeply exhausting. Perhaps that is why the samurai placed such importance on discipline and self-control. When everything around them was uncertain, those qualities gave them something steady to hold on to. But in time, an even greater challenge arrived. It was not another powerful army. It was a changing world, and no sword could stop what came next. For centuries, the samurai had lived in a world shaped by war. Their skills were needed. Their loyalty was valued, and their way of life gave them a clear purpose. Then something unexpected happened. Japan entered one of the longest periods of peace in its history. After generations of conflict, the country became far more stable. Large battles became increasingly rare. For ordinary people, this was welcome news. Families could rebuild. Towns could grow. Farmers could work their fields without the constant fear of war. But for the samurai, peace brought an unexpected challenge. Many had spent their entire lives preparing for battles that no longer came. Their role in society slowly began to change. Some became government officials. Others worked as teachers, advisors, or administrators. Many still carried their swords, but far fewer had reason to use them. Instead of proving themselves on the battlefield, they were expected to lead through discipline, learning, and good judgment. For some, that transition came naturally. For others, it was much more difficult. A warrior's identity had been shaped by generations of conflict. Now they had to discover what it meant to serve during a time of peace. Not everyone welcomed those changes. Some believed the old traditions were slowly fading away. Others adapted, believing that the true spirit of the samurai was never only about fighting. It was about character, honor, and duty. In many ways, peace became a greater test than war. It asked the samurai to hold on to their values even when the world around them no longer required their swords. Yet history never stands still. A new age was approaching. It would bring unfamiliar ideas, powerful technologies, and changes that no samurai, no matter how disciplined, could have prevented. Soon, the world they had known for centuries would disappear forever. For hundreds of years, the samurai had stood at the heart of Japanese society. They had served powerful lords, protected their communities, and shaped the country's history. But no tradition, no matter how old, remains unchanged forever. During the 19th century, Japan entered a time of remarkable transformation. The country began opening itself to the wider world. New ideas arrived. New technologies appeared, and the government began building a modern nation unlike anything Japan had known before. In this new world, the samurai's place in society began to disappear. The government no longer wanted separate warrior families with special privileges. Instead, it sought to create a single national army made up of ordinary citizens. For many samurai, this change was deeply painful. Their identity had been passed down through generations. Their values had shaped every part of their lives. Now they were being asked to leave that way of life behind. Some accepted the changes and found new paths. They became teachers, government officials, business leaders, and military officers in Japan's new army. Others struggled to accept a world where the sword no longer held the place it once had. The greatest challenge came in 1877. A group of former samurai rose in rebellion, hoping to preserve the traditions they believed were disappearing forever. It became known as the Satsuma Rebellion. Despite their courage and determination, they faced an army equipped with modern weapons and organized in a very different way. The age of the samurai could not be brought back. When the fighting finally ended, so too did an era that had shaped Japan for centuries. Yet the story of the samurai did not end on the battlefield. Their castles remained. Their writings survived. Their values continued to influence Japanese culture in ways both large and small. The swords may have grown quiet, but the ideas behind them did not disappear. Honor, discipline, loyalty, and the belief that character is revealed by the choices we make. Those ideals continue to live on, long after the last samurai had laid down their swords. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy they left behind. The samurai may have disappeared as a warrior class, but in many ways their influence never truly vanished. Walk through Japan today, and you will find traces of their world almost everywhere. Ancient castles still stand above modern cities. Carefully preserved temples still welcome quiet visitors. Museums display armor, swords, and handwritten letters that have survived for centuries. Yet the greatest legacy of the samurai is not found inside a glass display. It lives in ideas. Many of the values associated with the samurai continue to be respected in Japan today. Discipline, responsibility, respect for others, keeping one's word, doing a job with care, even when no one is watching. Of course, modern Japan is very different from the world of the samurai. People no longer live by the warrior code. The laws have changed. Society has changed. And many old traditions belong only to history. But echoes of those values can still be seen in everyday life. In schools, in workplaces, in traditional arts, and in the quiet pride that many people take in doing their best. Around the world, the image of the samurai has taken on a life of its own. They appear in books, films, television, video games, and works of art that continue to introduce new generations to their story. Sometimes those stories are accurate. Sometimes they are shaped more by legend than by history. But they all remind us that the samurai continue to capture the human imagination. Perhaps that is because their story was never only about swords or battles. It was about the choices people make when life becomes difficult, the promises they keep, the values they refuse to abandon, and the question that has echoed through every chapter of their history. What is truly worth living for? And what, if anything, is worth sacrificing for? The samurai answered those questions in ways that many of us may never fully understand. Yet their lives continue to invite us to reflect on our own. As our journey comes to an end, we return to the question we began with. Did the samurai truly choose death? Or were they trapped by the very idea of honor they had spent generations building? There may never be a single answer. Some samurai almost certainly believed, with complete sincerity, that honor was worth more than life itself. Others may have followed those expectations because they believed there was no other honorable path. In a society where reputation shaped everything, choosing differently could come at an unbearable cost. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. The samurai were not fearless legends. They were people who lived within a culture that placed extraordinary value on loyalty, duty, and honor. Some embraced those ideals. Some struggled beneath their weight. And all of them were shaped by the world they were born into. Looking back from today, it is easy to judge their choices. But history is rarely that simple. Every age has its own beliefs. Every society has values that seem perfectly ordinary to the people living through them. The samurai remind us that the hardest decisions are often shaped, not only by who we are, but also by the world around us. Perhaps that is why their story still fascinates us after so many centuries. Not because they were perfect, not because they never felt fear, but because they wrestled with questions that still feel familiar today. What do we owe to others? What do we owe to ourselves? And how far should anyone go to remain true to what they believe? Those questions have no easy answers. Perhaps they never will. For now, we can simply leave the world of the samurai behind, carrying with us a deeper understanding of the people behind the legends. Thank you for spending part of your evening here with me. I hope you've enjoyed our journey through the history, the myths, and the remarkable lives of the samurai. And wherever you are, I wish you a peaceful night and a restful sleep.